Bonjour et bienvenue à tous. My name is Oriane Ortiz, fundraising manager at the Musée de Cluny in Paris. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the making of the Cluny Museum of the Middle Ages with our director, Séverine Lepape, part of the Making of the Great Museums of Paris series with Russell Kelly. But before we get started on our travel through time, a reminder that we are using a Zoom webinar format. This means you can only see the guest speakers, but no worries, you can use the chat line to communicate with all participants. Give it a try and tell us where you are listening from. We also ask you to use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. They will be answered by our guest at the end of the talk. Please note we will also send you a recording a few days after each talk in the series. This program is presented in partnership with the Alliance Française de Chicago and the Alliance Française Miami Metro with communication support from the American Friends of Le Louvre, the American Friends of Versailles, the Friends of the Domaine de Chantilly, the French Heritage Society, and the Federation of Alliance Française USA. One last quick word as fundraising manager to present our partnership with Friends of Fondation de France. The Friends of Fondation de France enables American taxpayers, should they wish to make donations to the Musée de Cluny, to benefit from tax reductions to the fullest extent of the law. In 2024, the museum is seeking funds in particular to support the restoration of historic garden of the abbots of Cluny and the staging of our major exhibition at the end of the year on the sculpture of Notre-Dame de Paris, in the light of the most recent research, restorations, and excavations. To find out more about how you can donate, you can find the link to the page dedicated to the museum on the Friends of Fondation de France website in the talk chat line. Many thanks for your interest and support. And now a few words about Russell. Russell Kelly is the curator and moderator of the past 3 winter lecture series on the Grand Château of the Loire and Île-de-France, the making of the French gardens, and the Great Church of Paris. He has lived in Paris for 30 years and is the author of The Making of Paris, the story of how Paris evolved from a fishing village into the world's most beautiful city. To you, Russell.
Thank you so much, Oriane, and welcome to all from sunny Palm Beach, Florida. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Séverine Lepape, who is, as Oriane said, the director of the Cluny Museum, National Museum of the Middle Ages, which is the only national museum in France dedicated to the Middle Ages. And Séverine Lepape has a double degree in history and medieval history. She's a graduate of the prestigious École Nationale des Chartes and later taught at that very school, the École des Chartes, as well as at the École du Louvre and the Institut National du Patrimoine, the National Heritage Institute, which are the big 3 when it comes to art history and museum and curatorial studies in France. Her areas of specialization are medieval iconography and Nordic and French graphic arts of the 15th and 16th centuries. Séverine was appointed director of the Cluny Museum in 2019, just when the museum was embarking on an ambitious 3-year program to renovate and expand its exhibition space, on which she has left her mark. The museum reopened to rave reviews in May 2022. So you can see why Séverine Lepape is uniquely qualified to tell us the story of the making of the Musée de Cluny. À vous, Séverine.
Thanks a lot, Russell, and hello to everybody. Hello from now. I'm in my office, and maybe you will hear the traffic light because the museum is in the really center of Paris. It's really my pleasure to present you a brief history of the Musée de Cluny, Musée National du Moyen Âge. I will share my PowerPoint now. And I hope everybody can see it now. And tonight I will give you a brief history of the Musée de Cluny, Musée National du Moyen Âge. How Russell said, it is since 1992, the Musée de Cluny has become the National Museum of the Middle Age, and it is the only one in France to focus on the Middle Ages, not only through its collections, which have been considerably enriched and extended to include European art since its origin, but also through its mediation and cultural programming. But first of all, the museum was created in 1843. This year, we will celebrate the 180th anniversary of its opening in March. It's one of the most ancient museums in Paris, and its evolution is part of its specificity and its identity. This evolution is a fruit of a long history, which began even before the museum was founded in 1843. It is rooted in both collections and buildings. For the museum in the heart of the Latin Quarter, is one of the few places where you can travel back in time from Gallo-Roman Lutetia to the present day. The Musée de Cluny brings together two major architectural structures. The first, and you can see on the screen, is the so-called Northern Lutetia bath or thermal bath, built at the end of the 1st century. The best preserved and most spectacular room is the Frigidarium, with its 14 meters high roof. Other elements, such as the palestra and various caldaria, can be seen in the open air today. The second major building is the medieval Hôtel des Abbés de Cluny. Built in the late 15th century at the instigation of Jacques d'Amboise, abbot of Cluny from 1485 to 1516, it provided the abbot with a residence in Paris, a sort of pied-à-terre, from which to conduct important business with the king or the University of Paris, which was installed not very far from the museum. The Order of Cluny, as you may know, was one of the most powerful in Europe. The abbots of Cluny have taken up residence here since the late 13th century, but it is not known what the building may have looked like before it was built at the end of the 15th century. What is certain is that this building was always designed in symbiosis with the thermal bath, which the abbots never demolished. What's more, they used certain elements as structural, probably including stables in some of the Roman parts, and above all, a hanging garden above the Frigidarium. Jacques d'Amboise, as you can see on the screen, mansion was built on a plan that featured a courtyard enclosed by a big wall at the front and a symmetrical garden at the rear. The main entrance building was a spiral staircase, as you can see on the screen. On the facade of the latter, the owner's coat of arms was sculpted just above the doorway, you can see. His blason, his motto, and his emblem on the different parts of the spiral staircase. The scallop shell, because he was called Jacques, and you know the very important pilgrimage of Saint Jacques de Compostelle. The Order of Cluny maintained its residence throughout the modern area. The abbots of Cluny rarely stayed, in fact, in their hotel after the 16th century, and they rented out in all or in part. This situation lasted until the French Revolution, when it was dissolved and its ecclesiastical assets nationalized. And this is where our story begins. Over the centuries, the hotel was caught up in a galloping urban sprawl with small houses proliferating, some of them backing onto the thermal bath or even moving into them. This allowed the site to be preserved, even if its legibility was no longer great in the 18th century. As we can see here on the Turgot plan, Turgot map, and you can see here the Hôtel de Cluny. Of course, the name of the street, the names of the street have changed. The Rue du Sommerard was called the Rue des Mathurins, and I will explain why further on. Here we are before the big opening of the Boulevard Saint-Michel. The street before was called Rue de la Harpe. And here, this is mainly the route of the Boulevard Saint-Germain, which was called at the moment, at this time, Rue du Foin. And there was no Rue des Écoles. I will explain when it will be opened up, but it's mainly here with my mouse on the screen. Just before the French Revolution in 1781, the Frigidarium was rented to a barrel maker called Falaise, who decided to transform it into a gigantic multi-story warehouse, as you can see on this wonderful painting, which was certainly painted after Hubert Robert, or in the style of Hubert Robert, and you can see how the Frigidarium was completely transformed to become a warehouse of barrels. In 1805, the Hospice de Charenton became the owner of the thermal bath and extended the lease to Falaise. And in 1819, King Louis XVIII obtained the purchase of the lease from the barrel maker Falaise for the city of Paris. The monument was destined to be restored and used to form a spatial museum where objects of art from the period of the establishment of this thermal bath, which are scattered in various places, would be brought together. And you can see here a very interesting watercolor showing the beginning of the excavations in the 1820s. What happened for the hotel after the French Revolution? Then in 1812, the hotel was sold to Mr. and Mrs. Le Prieur, and they rented it to 5 different tenants. Some were printmakers, because there were a lot of printmakers in the area. Some were booksellers. And this is how, and you can see on this painting, how the abbot of the abbot's mansion was transformed as a location, a place to be a house with different people, certainly tenants that are in the courtyard. And here another view a little later, showing another moment, which I will explain just now. In 1833, Alexandre Du Sommerard, who was conseiller référendaire and then conseiller maître at the Cour des Comptes, a lover of medieval and Renaissance objets d'art, rented an apartment in this hotel to Mr. and Mrs. Le Prieur, with 6 main rooms on the 2nd floor of the hotel, as well as the chapel, because as the abbot mentioned, there were a chapel, and installed his collection there. And this is certainly what we can see here, not the installation, but a kind of mise en scène of his collection brought through the courtyard and going into his apartment. So he installed his collection there, enabling him, in his own words, to add to his collections by the effect of the setting. The proper term in French are ajouter à ses collections par l'effet du cadre. So for him, it was a perfect meeting of his interest and the setting of this wonderful late medieval building, civil late medieval building. Du Sommerard, you can see him on the screen with 3 different portraits. One is a painting, and one is a drawing, a caricatural one, and the third one is a lithograph. Du Sommerard was one of the most typical figures in the art collecting world of the Romantic period. Throughout his life, he took part in the activities of historical societies working to preserve monuments and documents related to the French national history. In his time, different collectors were interested by what we call now the Haute Époque, which was not necessarily only focused on the Middle Age, but also going from Antiquity to the beginning of the 17th century. Du Sommerard assembled a collection of objects made of antiques, furniture, stained glasses, armors, which shows the gradual progress that the arts have made in France since their Renaissance. This is how he's explaining and presenting his collection in his publication. His collection was the reflect of this, and then chronologically wide, and not only we all know Alexandre Du Sommerard as a specialist of Middle Age and Renaissance, but in fact his collection was much more wider, chronologically, but also geographically, because he was also interested in Extreme Orient ceramics, for example. Style and periods were mixed, and the most disparate objects were placed alongside one another with no real attention other than creating an atmosphere in a very romantic way of thinking. Some objects were even recomposition of several elements of different parts of time belonging to different objects. At that time, collectors were not guided by the complete authenticity of an object. He also wanted in his collection to evoke the memory of great men of national history, such as King Francis I, and I will show you some items of this. His interest lay in decorative art of all periods. You can see here for the Antiquity or the late Antiquity, two major works of art. One is ivory carved, showing Ariadne with a satyr, certainly beginning of the 6th century, carved in the Roman Empire, and associated to two heads of lion of rock crystal, certainly a little sooner than the ivory, and associated because they are supposed to have been found out in a tomb in the rain, and there was now supposed, this is the recent research on them, they were supposed to be part of a throne, a very important throne, maybe an imperial one, with ivory adorning the furniture and the rock crystal heads of lions as heads protome of the throne. You can see, for example, also his interest for medieval art and decorative art. You have here a coffret, which was made by a workshop called the Ambriachi Workshop, active in Florence in the beginning of the 15th century, using bones more than ivory to decorate this kind of wooden casket, wooden coffret. With a profane history of Elias. And this is an example of one of the objects that were in the collection of Alexandre Du Sommerard. And I will show you after this other collection that were not medieval. Meanwhile, the Frigidaire had become this Musée of Paris dedicated to the history of this city. And the idea was to send them all the elements coming from the building that were at this time destroyed, and there were a lot of them. Some were found, like you can see here, with the boatman pillar, also called Pilier des Nôtres, which is a really important example of a sculpture pillar given to the Emperor Tiberius by this association of the boatmen of the Seine, showing on each face of the pillar a god of the Roman pantheon, but also a god of the Celtic pantheon. And very interesting example of syncretism at this time in the first quarter of the 1st century. And this pillar was found out in the beginning of the 18th century under the core of the Cathedral of Notre Dame. You know that at this time, the Cathedral of Notre Dame had major work, especially in the core, and there was a new core made, and they made the discovery of these elements that were certainly made for Lutetia and were reused afterward, as it is quite often the case, as some fill for the main structures of buildings in the Ile de la Cité. And those pillars, those elements of the pillars were sent to this museum, this embryon of museum in the Frigidarium in the beginning of the 19th century. Another example of what this Frigidarium before the creation of the museum would have are the capitals from the Abbey of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, coming from the nave, and dated of the first third of the 11th century. The Abbey of Saint-Germain-des-Prés knew a big renovation in the first quarter, in the first third of the 19th century, under the supervision of the architect called Gaude, and the nave was completely dismantled in this time, and the architect thought that these original capitals could no longer come back to the building, to the abbey, and he decided to send them to this Frigidarium, to this new museum dedicated to the city of the history of the city of Paris. Another example of what we can find in the collection of Alexandre Du Sommerard, which is not medieval but Renaissance, is his interest for Francis I, with those stirrups supposed to have belonged to the king, and what we thought at the time of Alexandre Du Sommerard to be his bed. In fact, we now know that this bed was certainly a creation, an object of the beginning of the 17th century, and certainly not French but Italian. When Alexandre Du Sommerard died in 1842, his contemporaries who were sensitive to this wonderful collection and also this affinity that he created between the collection and the building, sought to create a new museum. In 1443, the French states decided to buy Alexandre Du Sommerard collection and obtained from the Veuve Prieur, so the owner of the hotel, the sale of the building. The acquisition of the building and the collection of Alexandre Du Sommerard was defended by François Arago, a deputy, a very important deputy, as you know, and also a very important scientist. And he made a wonderful, passionate play to the Chamber of Deputies, saying those words: "Let's make sure that the capital of France also contains a French historical museum. The planned museum would be of immense interest to artists. It would provide them with precise notions of the customs of our forefathers." And this is what the museum began, the gathering of the building of the hotel with the Alexandre Du Sommerard collection and the gathering of the Frigidarium, because the city of Paris decided with this creation of this, with the acquisition of the French state of the Hôtel Médiéval and the collection d'Alexandre Du Sommerard, decided to transfer the ownership of the thermal baths and the lapidary collections housed there to the state. And in July 24th of 1843, we can see the creation of the Musée des Thermes et de l'Hôtel de Cluny, placed under the authority of the Commission supérieure des monuments historiques. Also mentioned the Musée des Antiquités Nationales, the law establishing the museum stipulates that it will be devoted specifically to monuments, furniture, and objets d'art from Antiquity, Middle Ages, and Renaissance. The museum opened to the public on the 70th March of 1844. And also in the law, there was this stipulation that the first head, or the first curator of the museum should be the son of Alexandre Du Sommerard, Edmond Du Sommerard, with also another specificity to the museum, which was the appointment of an architect specialized in heritage, Albert Lenoir, who would have a very important mission in the years after this. With the opening of the Cluny Museum, the first aim was to restore the buildings and to exhibit the collections properly. This is here, you can see two images with a photo and a drawing, a caricatural drawing of Edmond Du Sommerard, the first head of the Musée de Cluny. You must have in mind that Edmond Du Sommerard in a certain way, grew up in the Hôtel de Cluny because he was a teenager when his father rented the apartment in the Hôtel Médiéval. So you can imagine how fond he was of the building, how fond he was of the collection, how he was associated very early with his father to this task and this taste of the Haute Époque and all those objects. So with the opening of the Cluny Museum, the first aim was to restore the buildings and to exhibit the collections properly. A spectacular restoration by Albert Lenoir was undertaken under the direction of Prosper Mérimée, young inspector involved in the museum's project. And as I said, the museum was created under the supervision of the Commission Nationale des Monuments Historiques. Albert Lenoir, you can see his portrait on a médaille, was the son of Alexandre Lenoir. Maybe it's a name that you have already heard about. Alexandre Lenoir was the founder of the Musée des Monuments Français. This museum was a museum that lasted very shortly, from 1795 to 1816. And this idea of this new museum was to host the famous records of France's national history, notably the burial monuments of the kings of France coming from the Abbey of Saint-Denis, for example. So different rooms were organized chronologically, and the museum was closed under the order of the King Louis the 18th. He saw this museum as a kind of creation of the French Revolution, and he didn't want to hear about it, so he closed it. But Albert Lenoir, which is also the son of this Alexandre, when he was appointed as the architect en chef, we would say today, architect of the Musée de Cluny, had in mind and in memory, a very strong memory of this Musée des Monuments Français. And of course, it inspired him a lot in his idea of restoring the Musée de Cluny. In 1833, Albert Lenoir at the Salon presented a project for a historical museum formed by the merger of the Palais des Thermes and the Hôtel de Cluny to display collections ranging from Antiquity to Renaissance. And you can see the drawing showing how he wanted to connect both buildings. Here's the Frigidarium and the Roman bath, and here's the medieval hotel. But in fact, he wanted to go further, as he would have liked to link those two buildings to the Mathurin convent. If you remember the map of Turgot, the convent of the Mathurin were on the east part of the Hôtel Médiéval, and it was an important building for this community, this ecclesiastical community of the Mathurin. And he wanted to connect until this convent of the Mathurin to present post-medieval collections, because you know now that the post-medieval collection in Alexandre Du Sommerard were very important. Unfortunately, the destruction of the Mathurin convent in 1863 put an end to this extension, and the project was only limited to the gathering of the Roman bath to the Hôtel Médiéval. The restoration was a huge task. The view that you have on the screen, this painting of Godefroy in 1856, shows that the hotel was still surrounded by buildings. The palisades on the foreground are those of a certain Delalin, a printer whose workshops have just been destroyed by the construction of the Rue des Écoles. I told you that the Rue des Écoles was quite recent in the age of in the time of Paris, because it was opened up between 1852 and 1868, and you have now a glimpse of how the Rue des Écoles was undergoing. The percement of the Rue des Écoles was undergoing. While Edmond Du Sommerard was director, the museum was opening and hosting the collection. You can see how the Frigidarium 1 year after the opening was organized with a lapidary collection. And the museum was thought as a conservatory of arts and crafts, of the technical and aesthetic styles of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. The 40 years during when Edmond Du Sommerard oversaw the collections was particularly felicitous one for the museum. By the time he died in 1885, the collections had grown tremendously. They had increased tenfold from 1,400 items of the collection of Alexandre, his father, to 14,000 items. Thanks to his good relation with the Commission Supérieure des Monuments Historiques, Edmond Du Sommerard was able to secure wonderful masterpieces for the museum. He also benefited from a favorable context, that of the art market's keen interest in ancient art, prompting excavations for new objects, and this is the case for the votive crowns of Gawazar that were digged up in the mid-19th century in a town of Fonte de Galazal near Toledo, where we discovered these wonderful votive Visigothic crowns that were presented to Edmond Du Sommerard, who decided to buy them. But also he benefited sometimes, it's difficult, but it was something good for him and for the Musée de Cluny. He benefited from the financial problems experienced by certain towns or communities, and this is the case of Basel. You can see here the famous altar front of the Basel Cathedral that was part of the treasure of the cathedral, but in the middle of the 19th century, the community decided to get rid, because they needed money, to get rid of the objects of the treasures of the cathedral, and this amazing altar front was on the auction art market, and Edmond Du Sommerard managed to buy it from the owner of this time, the Colonel Tebe. At the end of his, in the last years of his supervision of the museum, he had the satisfaction to see the 6 tapestries of the Lady and the Unicorn enter the collection of the Musée de Cluny, after 40 years of negotiation with the sous-prefecture and the city of Boussac, where they were kept. The ceramic collection has become an essential part, an example of mass production which was intended to provide French manufacturers with a repertoire of shapes and designs. The collection included French earthenware, Hispano-Moorish ceramics, as you can see on the left, Iznik, and some Italian earthenware as well. Spectacular objects such as the Charles V's nave, Charles-Quint, a table clock complete with automata, and De la Robia's monumental terracotta were acquired as well. The restoration of certain major buildings, such as the Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, enabled Edmond Du Sommerard to recover works that the architects of the time, Duban and Lassus, did not consider that they could be maintained in situ. And in in 1863, the demolition of the Mathurin Couvent, which I mentioned before, between the Boulevard Saint-Germain and the new Rue de Cluny, opened up new garden areas, adding around 5,000 square meters to the former garden of the abbots of Cluny. The garden was designed as a romantic garden where sculptures, some were original, you can see on the postcard here, the Saint-Germain-des-Prés Chapel of the Virgin Portal, and also the Argenteuil arcades. Some were plaster casts, not original one, populate the grooves and recalling the Élysée garden of the Musée des Monuments Français of Alexandre Lenoir. Edmond Du Sommerard had not only considerably increased the number of objects, he had also methodically published them in different catalogues. The most famous edition is the one published in 1883. He had organized them into 19 sections by major typologies and techniques: sculptures, paintings, stained glasses, enamels, earthenware, glassware, weapons, locksmithing, tapestries, precious material, and miscellaneous objects. The collection was created for the artistic education of people from all classes, from the workers to aristocrats. And there is really this idea of democratical purpose, on educational purpose of the museum. The circuit, the tour, the map of the Hôtel de Cluny, the Museum of Cluny, was not chronological because of the history of the museum. The attention paid to technical and historical aspects were more important at this time than specific provenance or aesthetic rarity. And as we can find in documents of this time, there was the idea that the Louvre was for the artists and Cluny for the craftsmen. You can see here the map of the Hôtel de Cluny in 1920 with three level of display. The last level is now, and since the Second World War, dedicated to the offices of the scientific team. But at this time, three levels were dedicated to the collection of the Musée de Cluny, and you can see that the room are dedicated to the typologies and technical area. In 1907, important administrative change happens in the status of the museum. The museum passed from the supervision of the Commission supérieure des monuments historiques to that of the Musée National. And it is important to have in mind because it changed a little bit the opportunity of acquisitions. And it's clear that the fact that the museum was during 40 years of the supervision of the Commission Nationale, Commission supérieure des monuments historiques, was really helpful for extending and enriching the collections. At this time, there was a really important survey and researches undertook on the collections by Edmond Du Sommerard, but also by his followers, Darcel or Haraucourt. And it managed to better understand the objects. So composite objects that were collected by Alexandre, for example, were dismantled and scholarly studied and published. And we realized at this time that there were sometimes for one furniture, 2 or 3 pieces of different objects that were put together in the time of Alexandre Du Sommerard. There was also an important politics of sending works of art in deposit outside Paris. And meanwhile, fewer collections were displayed and the itinerary was reorganized. In 1883 and 1888, new rooms were created. 2 were built by Paul Bosvillevald on the western part of the museum, and a room dedicated to sculptures and ceramics was created thanks to the covering of the courtyards by a glass roof. There are now the room 5 and 18 for those who knew well the museum. This part was between the Frigidarium and the medieval hotel, and the connection that was made at this time, at the end of the 19th century, managed to end the connection of the two buildings that Albert Lenoir wanted so much. In 1922, the director Edmond Haraucourt wanted to establish a national and historical approach of the collection as well as of the museum. He published a catalogue entitled History of France Explained, an annotated guide by room and series. Histoire de France expliquée au Musée de Cluny, guide annoté par salle et par série. So you can see how this idea of a Musée de Cluny dedicated to the history of France was really important before the First World War. You have here some images that giving you a good idea of how the collection at this time, before the Second World War, were exhibited. You can see, for example, in this painting, the Arm and Armors Gallery with a kind of profusion of objects, quite in the same time, in the same idea that that Alexandre Du Sommerard had in mind. And you can see also this room called Room of Francis I, when you can recognize the bed I showed you before. Here, another example of this new room built by Paul Boswell on the western part of the building, dedicated to enamels. You can see wonderful, huge medallions of enamels by Pierre Courtet, but also stone altarpiece and also wooden carved panels that are now in Equan. I will explain it to you. What you must have also in mind, even now in the new museum, that all the chimneys that are in the museum are not the original one. They were placed to make a kind of atmosphere. And it was also the case with chimney that were of the time of the Renaissance, with this chimney of the house of Hugues l'Allemand of the mid of the 16th century, that was installed in the room 5, dedicated to the bronze, and it has been sent to the Musée National de la Renaissance with other collections, and I will tell you why. And also the Frigidarium, you can see that the Frigidarium was the place where you could see all the lapidary collections, antique, but also medieval, in a certain atmosphere way of bringing the collection to the visitors. After the Second World War and a long closing, the collections were sent to the Château de la Loire in Chambord, such as a lot of national collections during this time, such as the Louvre. The museum undergoes a major transformation. A new permanent display was created by Francis Sallet and Pierre Verlet, and this new display was founded on techniques of creation. Based on the famous book on the Livre des Métiers, the Book of Trades, written during the reign of King Saint Louis in the 1230s by Étienne Boileau, the museographical itinerary was to describe all the activities featured in this book. And you have a good example here. This is a photo of the 70s, but it was in the idea of the renovation after the Second World War, where you can see all the silverwares and the goldsmithry and the enamels, Limoges enamels put together without any chronological repartition. And here another example of a period room dedicated to the interior decor of in the Middle Ages, with tapestries that are hanging close each other in the idea of the medieval idea of chambre de tapisserie, really to make a kind of continuity on the four walls of a room, and also medieval furniture such as this table, very rare octagonal table. Meanwhile, the decision was taken to focus the museum on Middle Ages. And this is really something important that was at this time, the idea that the collection should be restricted now to the Middle Ages. The team of the Musée de Cluny was responsible for identify objects which will create a new museum dedicated to Renaissance, a long time going from 1515, 1530s until the first third of the 17th century. 8,000 items with masterpieces such as the tapestries of David and Betsabe, for example, were sent in 1877 to the Château des Coins in the north of Paris, some 30 kilometers far from Paris, which had belonged in the 16th century to Anne de Montmorency, constable of the King Francis I. And those who follow well the museum series know certainly the Écouen Museum, because I know that Guillaume Fontenelle made you a wonderful presentation. Other post-medieval collections were sent to museums in région or castle for decoration, such as Azay-le-Rideau, Chaumont-sur-Loire, or Château. 1977 was also a rich year for the Musée de Cluny. That year, more than 300 pieces, including 21 heads of the King of Judah from the Cathedral Notre-Dame, were found under the courtyard and the stables of the Hôtel Moreau, which were at this time the headquarters of the Banque Française du Commerce Extérieur, French Bank of Foreign Trade, located at the 20 Rue de la Chaussée-d'Antin in Paris. This discovery was a major one. No one knew what had become of the sculptures adorning the western facade of the cathedral since 1796, when we know that they were ordered to be pulled down and evacuated. And what you can see here on the screen is a photo of the actual facade, western facade of the cathedral, where you can see the King of Judah, which are, of course, recreation by Viollet-le-Duc in the middle of the 19th century. But the original medieval statues, no one knew before 1977 where they were. The sculptures were obviously used as fill for the construction of the Hôtel Moreau at the end of the 19th century. Here you have an example of 7 of the 21 heads that were discovered and given to the Musée de Cluny, and the new room that were organized in the beginning of the 80s of the 20th century to host this major discovery. But what you must have in mind is the fact that the link between the Musée de Cluny and the Cathédrale Notre-Dame is far more ancient than this tremendous discovery. As a museum under the supervision of the Commission Supérieure des Monuments Historiques, the museum was sought at the proper place to keep all the elements that, for example, Viollet-le-Duc would not maintain in situ on the building when he was restored it. Before the creation of the Musée de Cluny, for example, in 1839, some 15 backwards-facing statues were found supporting a wall surrounding a coal mine located on Rue de la Santé in Paris, and sent them to the Musée of the City of Paris in the Frigidarium, which became, in the creation of the Musée de Cluny, a part of the Musée de Cluny. So this is something very important, and this is why we want to celebrate the reopening of the cathedral at the end of this year with a very important exhibition dedicated to the medieval sculptures of Notre Dame, with support of the Friends of Notre Dame. And I really invite you to come and see us in November, because there will be very major discoveries, as well as certainly some example of the pieces of the Jubé that which were discovered in 2022. Other important renovation before we undertook this big renovation of the recent years are the transformation of the room of the Lady and the Unicorn. You have here the example of the renovation in 1992 with the idea that they should be lighted with another system, less invasive, more respectful of the conservation of the tapestries, with fiber optics. And in 2013, we decided to change it again, because fiber optics was not that good, and we decided to change for LEDs, and we wanted also the tapestries to be hanged on easels, because we didn't want them to be vertical, because the weight of the tapestries could really make them suffer. So this is the idea of this easel, where they are slightly inclined in order that they can be viewed every day by the public. Now we are close to the end of my presentation, I just want you to give you a glimpse of what we did on those recent years. And I hope you will be able, or maybe you have been already visiting the museum since it has reopened in 2022. The big renovation work that we undertook for making the building accessible. The huge for a new entrance was really big. Before, visitors would enter by the courtyard and then by a tiny entrance, which used to be, in the time of the abbots, the kitchen of the hotel. So you can imagine that it was really nice, but not really convenient. The issue for accessibility was there since the street. With 18 changes of level, the building was faced to a very big challenge. The decision was taken to build a new entrance on the western part of the site where there was still place to it. An international competition was organized and Bernard Desmoulins was chosen. Bernard Desmoulins is a French architect who had a very strong experience of building or renovating monuments or museums, most of them that are classified are heritage monuments. He made, for example, the storage rooms for the Musée de Rodin at Meudon or the Grand Commun de Versailles. He proposed a pavilion which will be on stilts because it would be built on an archaeological reserve which has not been yet excavated and should be preserved, because maybe sometimes there will be money for making excavation of this Lutetia time. The facade that you can see on the screen is made of panels of cast aluminum with patterns that remind some of the architecture of the hotel. And this is really the spirit of Bernard Desmoulins, to do something new, but really respectful of the history of the building. As their surface is irregular, the light can play on the panels with them, giving a different view of the building depending on the weather or the time of the day. The street of the Rue du Sommerard, the former Rue des Mathurins, if you follow me, had to become a pedestrianized area with no change of level from the beginning. With this new entrance, we gained several premises that are thought as compulsory for a modern museum. Front desk, clock rooms, room for educational and technical purpose, and a small exhibition room, which is always really useful. The interior is really lightful, made of concrete in reference with the Roman antique concrete, an invention of that time. The spaces are luminous and give view to the archaeological remains, as you can see, for example, with the passerelle that can make a kind of scenery view of the archaeological remain in the front of the new entrance building. The inner renovation began in August 2019. It consisted of restoration of the walls, floor, ceilings, and as the building is protected as historical heritage, this part of this renovation was under the supervision of Paul Barnoux, the architect en chef des monuments historiques, a kind of follower of our Albert Lenoir. We also had to install, we also have to bring the building up to regulatory standards in terms of heating, electricity, and climate. And we also had to install new lifts in the middle of the itinerary. As you have in mind, the accessibility was the main purpose of this renovation. And for example, in the room dedicated to Notre Dame, where we had to shorten a little bit the tribune of the sculpture to install this new lift. And also to put a new lift on the eastern part of the hotel, where place was really rare. The stair you can see here was dated of the mid of the 20th century. We demolished it because it was not classified, and we decided in the very, very tiny area to put an elevator and to put also a spiral staircase, which was designed and a wonderful design by Paul Barnoux. A new scenography was created by Adrien Gardère, who was associated to Bernard Desmoulins. The museum wanted to change its display and to organize it chronologically. It is a strong evolution in contrast of the history of the museum, as you have now. But because the museum has become dedicated to the Middle Age since 1992, we considered that this chronological order was the easiest way for the audience to understand the great evolution of this very long-lasting period. All the techniques can then dialogue in order to make understand the evolution of forms and meanings. This is the case, for example, in the room dedicated to Roman and Gothic art, where, of course, a lot of sculptures can be seen, but also ivories, goldsmithery, wonderful olifants, book plates, elements of liturgy that could dialogue in forms, for example, in short scale and big scale, with very big capitals coming from Saint-Germain-des-Prés. It also gave us the opportunity to gather things that would be scattered in different rooms of the museum since the Second World War, because you had a room for sculptures in stone, a room for stained glasses, room for goldsmithery, and this is the case for the Sainte-Chapelle, where we managed to, we inherited of the statues of the apostles, the stained glasses, some of the stained glasses of the Sainte-Chapelle, and the small reliquary in gilded reliquary that you cannot really well see on the photo. And for the first time of the story of the museum, we can put them together to give a good idea of the audience of what was the medieval architecture of the Sainte-Chapelle, a very major building of the time of Saint Louis, as you know. This is all the other photos of our apostle sculptures which were restored as a lot of master works of our collection for the renovation. We decided also to isolate some specific area in the time of the creation of Middle Age. Italian area was really important for us to show the vitality of the sculpture, and also the scenes, goldsmithery that you can see in this room. Of course, all the paintings of this time are now in the Louvre, and we are not very good for paintings in our collection, but this is the idea to show this very big the very importance of Italy in the Middle Ages. And the last room, which is a kind of bouquet final, shows a religious and liturgical furnishing in Northern Europe at the end of the Middle Age, when you can show and understand how altarpieces, carved altarpieces or painted altarpieces at the end of the Middle Ages were very important. It was also the first time in the history of the museum where we were managed to hang in a whole part, the 40 meters of the tapestries dedicated to Saint Etienne, Saint Stephen of the Cathedral d'Auxerre, before it was scattered in 2 or 3 different rooms, because we didn't have the place to show them in their unicity, and also to show the idea of liturgy and how a core was organized in a medieval church at the end of in Northern Europe at the end of the Middle Age. This is where our journey ends. I really thank you for your attention. I hope you better understand now the specificity of the Musée de Cluny, which has a very strong identity in the network of the national museums and network of Parisian museums. And I hope you understand better this very interesting and rich evolution from a museum dedicated to the history of France and of techniques to a museum now specialized in the Middle Age. And I invite you to our further exhibition of this, of our forthcoming exhibition of this year. In spring, we will have the Art en France through Charles VII, which will be a wonderful exhibition dedicated to a time in the art of French which is not really known during the time of Charles VII and Jeanne d'Arc. We will have a wonderful exhibition of the treasure of Oni. This medieval gold mill treasure is one of the 7 marvels of Belgium, and the Musée de Namur decided, because they are under renovation work, to lend it to us, and it is the first time that he is leaving Belgium to come to France, so it will be quite an event. And what I said before, this wonderful exhibition on Notre Dame in order to celebrate the reopening and the building of the cathedral in autumn, with an exhibition dedicated to the sculpture and another exhibition with the Bibliothèque Nationale dedicated to the library and medieval manuscript coming from the Cathedral Notre Dame. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Séverine, for that wonderful presentation. That was terrific. And the images were terrific, for sure. I particularly like the Plan de Turgot from 1739, which really gave you an idea of what this museum looked like, or the hotel looked like in the mid-18th century, and the Terme de Cluny next to it. So that was extremely informative. I can tell you, having visited the renovated museum, it's spectacular, and the organization of the rooms in chronological order is extremely successful, and the display cases are magnificent, much better than in the 1970s. Love the glass displays so that you can see the rough walls behind. There are a couple of questions. One about, you mentioned, I believe, that there was a book that came out, perhaps it was in the 1920s, about how objects should be displayed in museums. I may have gotten the decade wrong. Could you please tell us what the title of the book is and the author?
Oh, you mean the publication by Edmond Haraucourt?
Probably.
Yes. He wanted to make, it's not really, he wanted to make a guide of the museum, but what is interesting is that he didn't make a guide like we would do it, showing and presenting the different rooms of the museum. The idea was really to show how the museum was a good example of the history of France. And the title of his book is Histoire de France expliquée au Musée de Cluny, guide annoté par salle et par série. And it was published in 1922 by Edmond Haraucourt, who was at this time the director of the museum.
Okay, thank you very much. Another specific question relates to salle 11, room number 11. And is the ceiling in that room the original ceiling?
No, nothing of the ceiling is really original. Most of the ceiling has been changed in the 19th century, especially what we call the corbeilles, which were completely reworked by Albert Lenoir. You must have in mind that when he was appointed as the architect of the Musée de Cluny after its creation, the museum, the building was not in a very good state, because there were 5 different apartments had been created. So there were very important changes that have been made, and not really respectful of the heritage of the monument. So he had to reconstruct a lot of things, and especially some parts of the ceiling. The wall, of course, are original. Lots of the elements are original, but ceilings and floor as well are recreation of the 19th century.
Thank you very much. We have a question, which is, you mentioned a scientist involved in the creation of the museum around 1840. Who was that scientist?
It's François Arago. François Arago was really important. He was a politician, but also a scientist. And when there was this idea to create a new museum, this has to be debated in our parliament. And because the state had to find money, and it was a very important amount of money to buy the building, the Hôtel de Cluny, and to buy the collection of Alexandre Du Sommerard. So he was a kind of rapporteur of the law, and he made a very vibrant discourse explaining why we should keep the building and the collection together and why it should become a national museum for giving a good example of the idea of the history of France, so very nationalist in their idea, but also with the idea that all the objects that were important and very diverse could give a kind of model for creation for artists and also for everybody. So there was a very strong impetus, political and ideological, in the creation of the Musée de Cluny, and really supported by politicians of this time.
Thank you. One of the things that you mentioned was that on the top floor of the museum, it's now dedicated to the scientific team. And this is a word that is often used when describing French museums, the scientific team. And we in America are not so used to using science in connection with a museum. So could you please explain who is in the scientific team?
In the scientific team, of course, we have curators, 6 curators who are in charge of the whole collection of the Musée de Cluny. We have people in charge of the documentation, the library, all the different documents that can give information about our works during all the evolution of their existence in the museum, and our registers, because our registers are considered in France not only as technical people but also scientists people, because they have a knowledge of conservation which is really important for our field. So this is why we calling scientific team in opposition. It's maybe something very French as administration team, which will be accountant, and so on.
Okay, yeah, that clarifies it. Thank you very much. So you said in 1992, Cluny became a national museum. How did that change the museum? What does being a national museum do?
We've been a national museum since the beginning of the 20th century, so there was not a big change for this, but I can explain to you what a national museum is. A national museum means that the collection belongs to the state, and the state decides where the collection would go. The Musée de Cluny is not the owner of its collection. It's just what we call an affectataire of national collections. And it means that we have very high standards of conservation, that we have deontology in the way we are showing them, in the way we are lending them, exhibiting them, restoring them. And it means that most of the money for us is coming from the ministry and the French state to make the museum working, and also to pay all the employees.
Okay, that is a very helpful explanation, which also explains how come you volunteered, I'm sure, to transfer your Renaissance collection to the Château d'Écouen. You didn't have a choice.
No, it was really a decision of the state, and if the state says, I hope it will not, they will not take this decision. But one day, if they said the Musée de Cluny is over, we want to put the collection in the Louvre, we want to put the collection in another museum, they can do it. They are the owners of the collection.
And there is some talk about a Musée de Notre Dame in the Hôtel Dieu. So it might be your room dedicated Notre Dame could possibly move.
I'm not sure of that. We have a very good relationship with the people in charge of this new museum. Well, the idea of this new museum, because the new museum has not yet been created. I think, and they think that they have enough collections other than the collection of the Musée de Cluny, to make a nice and very important, interesting museum. So I'm pretty sure it will not happen.
Okay. Well, I think we'll have to leave it at that, Séverine. Thank you so much for that terrific
Thank you.
presentation. And thank you to our partners for their support in this series. Thank you out there in the audience for participating today. And we hope to see you next Thursday, same time, when we will explore the history of the Musée de Carnavalet, the Museum of the History of the City of Paris, with curator Ulysse Jardin. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Merci, Séverine.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Goodbye. Good evening.